We're ready? Oh.
It sounds really loud when there's less people in the room. We now call this meeting to order. It is the third meeting of the TopCity Youth Council. We now proceed with the roll call.
Mayor De La Isla.
Here.
Councilmember Hernandez. Here. And we have two vacant positions for 2 and 3. Councilmember Hines.
Here.
Councilmember Osborne. Councilmember Caracioni.
Here.
Councilmember Maley.
Sorry, here.
Councilmember Phillips. And Councilmember Sternon.
Here.
We have completed the roll call. The next item on the agenda is the action item. You have received ahead of time your minutes. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at the minutes and go over them. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections with regards to the minutes? Seeing no questions with regards to the minutes, is there a motion for approval?
I move to approve the minutes.
We have a motion for approval by Council Member Caracioni. Do we have a second?
I second that.
We have a second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Additional comments or questions? Seeing no additional comments or questions, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Oh, they can vote with the buttons? Oh, yeah, just like the council. Okay, so proceed by voting.
We have 2, 3. Did you vote?
Did you press your button?
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so I guess we need to raise our right hand. Do we have 6 yes? 6 yes.
All right,
All right.
motion passes. At this point in time, we will open up the semi-town hall meeting event that we have today. I will say that I am very impressed with this group of individuals. They have taken time off of their weekend to sit down and talk with me about what their desires were to have this meeting. And I will say that I give them full credit, as they deserve. Early on, when we started convening as a group, we were very clear about the fact that as mayor, I was not going to tell them what their agenda was going to be, that it was going to be all about what they wanted to drive and what conversations they wanted to have. The first meeting, we had a conversation about quality of place. They had individuals here from Visit Topeka. They talked about the things that they wanted to propose. They discussed the fact that they were seeing that there was limited ability for social media with regards to the activities that are happening in the community that could be capitalized on. So the people from Visit Topeka and the Greater Topeka Partnership left with some ideas on things that they could improve upon to include young leaders. The second meeting that they wanted to have was a very moving meeting with regards to mental health. I think that they, as we all know, have been extremely impacted by several suicides in our school districts. Most of them know somebody that is struggling with a mental health condition, and they want to talk about how to break the stigma. They wanted to talk about how to talk about suicide and have courageous conversations on how they were able to keep themselves safe and maybe even engage with the organizations in our community that provided that service. We also had individuals from the school districts that came over and discussed these issues with them as well so that they would have resources. Again, this all driven by them. As we were talking about the next topic for the meeting, we all understand and we know how there have been several shootings happen at the national level, and how schools have been impacted by this. And in the 2 months ago, I think it was, I was able to participate in LA with the National Youth Council team in a conference with other youth councils from across the nation, talking about different things that students could do. So the way that it worked was we had, from our delegation, some individuals went to the town hall meeting, which is what they wanted to do tonight. Some of the delegation went to the gun violence, and then the other part of the delegation went to the registering to vote. And then they were talking about how do we help other people develop more in other communities, develop other youth councils, because in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we feel like the voice of our youth is extremely important, valuable, and relevant. It's not just they're our future, they're our now. They wanted to talk about gun violence. And I will address a little bit of what you will see today, because I want to publicly thank the individuals that are here. Invitations were sent out to the federal delegation of the state of Kansas. Invitations were sent out to every single council member, to every single commissioner, and to every single person in the Shawnee County delegation for the state. Invitations were sent to our chief of police, who is here, and to Shawnee County Sheriff as well. I want to say thank you to the individuals that are here today that want to hear the concerns of these young people. And most importantly, what I was very impressed with is the fact that from these meetings, that they will learn how each individual has a role with regards to whatever it pertains to gun violence. They will come together and they will start then coming up with resolutions that they will present not only to the Topeka Youth Commission to ratify, but then they will bring back to the city council and send a letter to all of the other representatives that were not able to attend today, so that they are able to provide the information of what they feel is a direction that our community should be taken and how they want to participate and support the people that are here speaking to us today. So this is a very serious issue. You may hear things today that you agree with and you don't agree with, and one of the things that we talked about was if there is a point of view that you don't agree with, to lean in and listen with curiosity, because it's important for us to hear dissenting voices, because we learn a lot from that. And we had that discussion here. They were very prepped and excited to hear about diverse voices today. So that being said, does anybody want to make any remarks before we open up the town hall and we invite the speakers to come up to the podium and answer your questions? All right, let's get this going. So I think the first person signed up to speak is our Chief of Police, Mr. Bill Cochran, who is here in his sibs.
Well, I signed in civics because I encourage everybody to take this opportunity if you get it. Your Leadership Edge with the Kansas Leadership Center. I was over in Kansas City. It's a 3-day class, so if you get that opportunity, I strongly encourage you to go to that. So we finished up day 1 today. So
Thank you, Chief, for making time to be here today. So the way that this is going to work is the students have developed questions, and all of the speakers are going to be asked these questions, and feel free to answer them and say, I don't know right now, or whatever you want to go. They have asked me to start. So, Chief, could you talk to the students about what legislative or regulatory authority you have on the issue of gun violence or gun use?
Well, as the chief of police of a municipality, we don't have a lot of influence as far as legislation and writing legislation. Where we have input is when legislators and their staff or representatives from the lobbyist groups ask questions, like from the Sheriff's Association or the Police Chiefs Association, and they'll inquire, they'll have questions. So say certain legislation comes up, like the example, 18-year-olds being able to carry firearms legally. And so they'll ask our input, what do we think about this? How is this going to impact our communities? What's this going to do to young people? What's this going to do to adults? And so that's where we have input when it comes to legislation as far as that goes.
Jacob, would you like to start with the next question?
I think
Oh,
Isabel.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry. When gun violence occurs, what is your role in a response?
Well, when gun violence occurs, we're usually the first responders as law enforcement, and that is, it entails a lot of things. The initial response, we make sure the scene's secure, we make sure anybody who needs medical treatment receives medical treatment, and then we start looking into, start to do the investigation and look for individuals that may have been responsible for it. But the priorities when we're alive are life safety and securing of the crime scene. That's our primary role. And so once that takes place, if we're able to build a case, detectives will put that together. Then they will forward that case to the DA's office. The DA's office reviews that. They consider whether there's enough there to file charges or not. And then if we don't have somebody in custody, If we have a suspect and they say there's enough to file charges, then they'll issue an arrest warrant for that individual, and we look for him that way. If we get there on the scene and we're able to take somebody into custody, that's a probable cause arrest, not a warrant arrest. And in the probable cause arrest, you have to establish you have enough reason to believe that this individual was the one that committed that crime at that time. And so we then consult with the DA's office or the DA's representative when we have those situations and they agree, yeah, you have enough or you don't have enough. And if you do, then they'll end up going to jail. If not, then that individual's released.
All right, what are some of your proposed solutions for the current mass school shootings and gun-related violence in our city, country, state, and nation? And how can the Youth Council support these measures?
Well, I think it's great that young people like yourselves are coming to the table in forums like this and taking on this responsibility. It shows that you care about what's going on in your communities. It shows that you care about what's going on throughout the country. One of the things that when we talk about mass shootings, there's a lot of conversation out there, red flag laws, this and that, people with mental illness shouldn't be able to possess guns. The interesting thing that I think we need to take into consideration is in these mass shootings, almost all of them seem to appear that the individual purchased the guns legally. So if they purchased them legally, then some of these measures that are being talked about, I don't know if really will have an impact on that. One of the things that we are constantly working on in law enforcement is de-escalation training. We do a lot of that. And a lot of times when something happens with police and a citizen, people say, you need more de-escalation training. Well, we do a lot of that. But I think what we really need to think about and concentrate when we talk about young people is teaching young people how to de-escalate. We've had several cases, I can name you 5 right off the top of my head, in the last 2 months where the suspect was under the age of 17 that used a firearm. And 2 of those were domestic violence cases. So where are we at in society when a 17-year-old is dating an 18-year-old and the 17-year-old gets so upset that they take the life of the 18-year-old by the use of a firearm at 17 and 18, okay? I think that's the key. And so I think one of the things that we really need to start looking at, and I think this is where youth councils like yourself can have a lot of impact at this level, is we overlook that simple fact of de-escalation at the onset of when things take place. It's okay to take a step back. It's okay to walk away, but our young people don't understand that. I don't think we get that point across. And so I think that's one of the things where you guys can have a major impact in working with your schools and stuff is, you know, maybe ask for what de-escalation training looks like for young people. And I think we need to start that as young as, you know, the middle schools, because we teach kids, young people, right from wrong. They know right from wrong for the most part. But when they come in possession of a firearm and then they get into that heated situation and they don't take a step back, they don't think, they act. And that's what a lot of our crimes are that involve young people are you know, crimes of passion or confrontational type crimes. And so I think we really need to look at how do we come up with a de-escalation program. And, you know, this is something I think that could be developed here and with the right avenues. As the mayor has a lot of connections now across the country, you know, we can develop programs that can be a model program that we could take across the United States and maybe to foreign countries. But I think focusing on some de-escalation stuff for young people.
You just asked a question. They were just the 3 questions? Okay, so are there any other questions now that we've had the discussion that you would like, Representative Malai?
I know you said that one of the big problems is that the perpetrators of these shootings often, or most of the time, buy their guns legally. Do you think that legislation like background checks or requiring permits to buy a gun would help prevent that kind of violence?
Well, when I was talking about those, I was talking about like the mass shootings that we've had, it's interesting, that firearms are as accessible as they are. So requiring permits and things like that, I don't know if those will prevent the type of crimes that we're talking about. We have a disconnect, I think, in our society, and we have to figure out what that disconnect is. And I think, Illinois, for example, is the one state that has one of the most strictest gun laws in the United States. Very restrictive, but yet you look at Chicago and you look at their crime rate and you look at their homicide rate. And so are those things working? And so we have to take a step back, I think, and maybe analyze and look at things. So I think there's a lot of approaches that we can do, but I do think a lot of it still is that education. And if you are a gun owner, then I think you need to be a responsible gun owner. Lock your firearm up, put it away, put it out of reach of young people, don't leave it in your car, and things like that. So, I'm not saying, I'm not advocating we take guns or anything like that away. I'm just saying, if you're going to own a firearm, then be responsible. And I think that's the thing we need to take into consideration. We it's September 18th or whatever, and we've already seized 325 firearms from individuals that shouldn't have firearms. And we've had 100 and some or more that have been stolen out of cars. And so again, that message, if you're going to own a firearm, then take ownership of it and do the right thing.
Additional questions for the chief? City manager?
One thing too, Chief, if you could talk about the Gun Stopper
program?
program that you started last year and what kind of results you're seeing from that.
The Gun Stopper program is a program that we initiated. It's the focus to get illegal firearms off the streets or take it out of the hands of individuals that should not be possessing it. We have a great working relationship with USD 501 and USD 501 Police, and one of the things that we were able to do was get the Gun Stopper app put on and Crime Stopper app put on all the iPads that they issue. And we've had a lot of success with that in the aspect that the icon is on all iPads. So if a student picks up another student's iPad, everybody's going to have that icon on there. It's one they can't erase. And so the main purpose behind that is not to give the impression that one student may be snitching on another student, because everybody has it on there. But we've had a lot of success with that. We get a lot of tips through Crime Stoppers, and the Gun Stopper tips are reported that way. And then we follow up on all those. And we've had success. We've removed firearms off of individuals that didn't have it. We have had students that have said, hey, I know a young person that has a firearm and shouldn't have a firearm, and we've been able to intervene on that. So the Gun Stopper program is one of those that we've had a lot of success. Would we like to have more? Yeah, because the whole purpose of it is to get guns out of the hands of individuals that shouldn't have them, and then to remove illegal firearms off the streets. So that's a pretty simple initiative that we're done. We're in the process now of working with JUMP and the Center for Peace and Justice on a group violence intervention program. We're very excited about that, where that's going to lead. That's still in the formation stage, but the whole purpose there is, again, when I talked about the de-escalation training or de-escalation education for young people, this is what the group violence intervention program will do. Is going to be able to engage individuals that we believe have the potential for violence or maybe be victims, but have conversations with them and say, hey, what can we do? How can we help you? How do we make sure that we keep you at home, raising your kids, taking care of your families, and all that. And when I say young people, I say up to the age 25. That's kind of what we're focusing on is that 15 to 25 age group, because that's our highest category of victims in the city of Topeka, is where a lot of those fall. And so we're excited about that. We're working on a national program with PERF, which is Police Executive Research Firm. We're the only law enforcement agency out of the United States that was chosen for this. And it's a deep dive into non-lethal shootings. And the purpose behind that is come up with a template, a program, that can be modeled, that we can take to other law enforcement agencies across the United States to help reduce gun violence. And what makes this very important, what it is, it also helps in this aspect. In the city of Topeka, we averaged in 2018, and the average is the same spot on right now in 2019, 40% of our gunshot victims do not cooperate with law enforcement. And so what this program also focuses on, how do we engage those individuals to be more receptive to law enforcement, to want to help us solve those crimes. And so that's what this program works with. And so I think what's really cool in the city of Topeka that we got going on, we got the group violence intervention initiative started. We got this research going on with PERF, and at the end of it, in about 2 years, we're going to have really a dynamic template program that's going to be marketed to other law enforcement agencies throughout the United States. And when I say marketed, there's not going to be a charge or anything like that, but it's going to be put out there by the police research firm, which is really cool. And like I said, we're the only law enforcement agency in the nation doing that.
We're kind of proud about that. Chief, I think that before I ask you to hold off till we have the last portion, which is going to be all of us sitting up here and allowing anybody in the public to ask us questions as an open town hall. The one thing that you did talk about, but I just wanted to make sure that we all heard, is the fact that there's a lot of violence that occurs with weapons that are obtained, that are illegal weapons because they have been stolen. And one of the biggest causes of the people receiving those weapons is because they break into a car, and then they find out that the person had a weapon in there and the weapon was not secure. As we talk about solutions, and we have talked about the difference between a challenge that we could just fix by changing a policy, or a challenge that has to do with people behavior and culture, and this is what we call adaptive challenges. I want us to start thinking, as you guys are thinking about the resolutions and the things that you can do with the marketing, is how do we get the message out there for the responsible gun owners to be able to take really good care of their weapons, because a lot of the bad things that are happening in our community are happening because people who are safe gun owners are leaving their weapons unattended, and they're falling into the hands of the wrong people. So, additional questions for the chief before we go with Representative Weigel? Okay. Representative Weigel, if you could please come to the podium.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it.
Representative, I have the onus of asking the first question, and as you heard, what legislative or regulatory authority do you have on the issue of gun or weapon use?
Well, that's an interesting question. As a representative in the 56th district, part of the legislature, we have legislative authority to make laws and pass them and then send them on to the governor to sign. Some of the bills that have been offered in the last two sessions, had to deal with something that was already talked about by the chief. It's about 18-year-olds not only carrying guns, but concealed carry, and also about reciprocity between other states and the state of Kansas. I'm not a big fan of that because, first of all, they don't have to have any training really at all, none to speak of. And if you're allowing individuals from another state to come in the state of Kansas, we have no idea what kind of training they have, what kind of background they have. So that to me is, pardon the pun, a red flag that we should take a look at. Fortunately, that bill never got out of committee, and I think it was referred back to committee, so that one was not voted on. We had another bill that I can't remember the number. it had to do with notification of law enforcement or somebody in authority, people that are in senior citizen communities or perhaps have some issues, whether it's special needs or something, and whether they have access to a firearm or not. And that bill also did not pass because basically what the bill wanted to do was say that they weren't going to be notified, and no one was going to be notified in those circumstances. So those two pieces of legislation were just this past legislative session, and they did not come out of committee, or they came out of committee and then they went back. They were never voted on the House floor.
So Representative Weigel, if I could add to that question, and I'm sorry for breaking from the questions, you clearly have indicated that the state has a lot of authority with regards to regulating gun use.
Correct.
How many members in those bodies are there so that we the students kind of have an idea of how many people are in both the Senate and the House at the state level, and how many votes do you need in order to get a bill passed? Because I think that as they've been more attuned with city council, I think that our youth would like to know how the state government works.
Good question. There are 125 members in the Kansas House. I can't remember what the breakup is. There's 41 on the Democratic side, so 41 minus out of 125, whatever it is, that's over on Republicans. The Republicans are a definite majority in both houses. On the Senate side, 40 senators for the state, and I think the breakup is 31 Republicans and 9 Democrats. Well, actually, that's a caveat. One of the senators switched his affiliation from Republican to Independent. He's from Western Kansas, so you have to make that as a qualifier. So.
Okay.
And what was the other part of the question?
And then how many votes would it take for each body to pass any sort of legislation?
Well, simple majority. So like 64 votes. Don't check me on my math, but it's a simple majority in both houses.
Okay. Next question.
When gun violence occurs, what is your role in the response?
Well, first of all, like and I don't know if you're addressing just gun violence in general, or if you're talking about mass shootings that have occurred periodically over the years. I'm concerned about basically what you've talked about up here. It's mass shootings in our schools, our churches, our synagogues. Those things are very troubling to me. And I don't know what the answer is. If I knew the answer to that, I'd be in a much higher pay grade than what I am right now. So, but I always like to get as much information as I can on what happened, who the shooter was, what was his motivation, things like that. And I'll just say this, that when I see shootings, and just as a caveat on this, when I first got elected to the legislature in November of 2012, just over a month later, you had the shooting in Sandy Hook School, where there were 20, I think the oldest was like 10 or 12 children were killed, plus 6 teachers and staff by an individual that was, I just don't know however to describe that individual. He actually killed his mother and took her guns and then went down to the school and just went, I don't know how to describe that, but that was very shocking to me. So, and up until that point, there have been some shootings off and on, but nothing like that had occurred between Columbine till then. So not to say that there weren't mass shootings between 1999, which is the 20th anniversary this year of Columbine, if you're not aware of that. But either I wasn't paying a lot of attention to that, or they just didn't come up on my radar for some reason. But after 2012, I started paying very much attention to those.
So Representative Weigel, when something like that, let's say that something like that were to happen in the community that you represent, what would your response be? I mean, in the sense that, do you have a role in engaging the community? Do you have a role as, what role would you take in that, at that moment?
Well, sometimes we have town meetings, or we have meetings over here at the Topeka Shawnee County Library. It may not just be on that issue, it may cover a lot of different issues, but that's usually a topic that gets brought up, especially in this day and age. So that's one of the things that I like to listen to. I like to get a variety of opinions from all walks of life, from people like yourselves, young people, teachers, educators, administrators, just across the board, parents. And so I like to listen to, I like to get everybody's input that I can. Some people will say, well, you're leaning this way or you're leaning that way. Well, I can just tell you from my background, I have 28 years of law enforcement experience before I ran for the Kansas House, so I'm a little bit aware of what goes out on the street. I've worked the streets for a lot of years, so very cognizant of that. So that's the things that I like to look at, and hopefully we can come up with some solutions. I'll just point out that last year, Florida, which is a very conservative state, passed some laws, red flag laws, and I think some enhanced background checks. Now, I can't remember whether the governor signed those into law or not. They were passed in their legislature, but I don't know if he signed those into law. But for that to happen down in Florida tells me that we can do that in other states across the United States as well. And it's not going to, eliminate it completely, but it's a start. It's somewhere to start. And if you don't start doing something somewhere and say, we're going to do something here, then nothing's going to get done, and this is just going to continue.
Representative Malati, your last question.
What are some of your proposed solutions for the current mass school gun-related violence in our city, county, state, and nation?
Can you say that again, just a little bit louder?
What are some of your proposed solutions for the current mass school or gun-related violence in our city, county, state, and/or nation?
I think enhanced security. I'll just tell you something else that got floated about a year or so ago in the legislature. I don't know where it came from, but one of the proposals, I think it came out of federal state affairs, but I'm not sure, was something to do with arming teachers in our schools. And not only doing that, but paying for it with taxpayer dollars to do that, to arm those teachers. That didn't go very far, so, and I can say it wasn't just me, but there was a lot of opposition to that as well. So things like that, I don't know where it came from. I'm not going to point the finger at anybody, but some things like that, that's just a no-brainer. Let's not even go there. 501, as the chief talked about, I know the chief of police over there very well. That's Chief Brown. When he was a training officer with Topeka PD, I was a training officer for the state agency I worked for. So we collaborated a lot, and I still see him from time to time, and he does a very good job. And so things like that, working hand in hand with the civilians and the school security or police is one step to hopefully tamp down the violence.
So Representative, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but understanding that you have legislative authority, if there was one thing that you would propose as a bill, for example.
Red flag laws.
Red flag laws. Could you explain to the students what a red flag law is?
Basically, what a red flag law is that if an individual has access to a firearm and exhibits some kind of behavior that he or she has said that he's going to do something or she's going to do something, or they talk about it on social media, and a parent or guardian or a friend picks up on this, and they can contact their local police department. The police can, if the red flag law was in place, would be able to basically conduct a little investigation and seize that person's weapons temporarily. They're not going to take them away permanently until that person can have an adjudication on that before a judge. And the judge will rule whether, yeah, there's no threat, and they would give the guns back to that individual, or they would hold it until something else occurs with that individual. That's basically the short version of what red flag laws are. And that is one of the pieces of legislation that was passed in Florida. So I think that's a pretty good legislation.
How would you say?
The other thing, and it's more broad, it's more at the federal level, is universal background checks. There again, it's not the all-encompassing panacea, but if it stops some person from killing somebody else or going in and committing mass killing in a church or a school or a Walmart, then I think that's a good piece of legislation.
Representative Carciani.
How would you respond to the counter-argument that red flag laws limit individuals' due process rights?
That it does give them due process. In fact, that's the purpose of a red flag law, is that they get due process. A lot of people that are opposed to that are saying, oh, you're taking our guns away, or you're going to take that person's guns away. Temporarily, yes, until, the way I think that works is that they have to have a hearing before a judge within, I think, like 30 days. I'm basing this on Florida's law. So they would have a hearing within 30 days, and then the judge or whoever is adjudicating that would gather all the facts, hear testimony, and then that judge would make a decision on whether or not that person should not continue to have those weapons or not, or if he or she believes there's no threat, then those weapons will be returned to him. So it's kind of a misnomer when they say that they're taking them away. It's basically a timeout, for lack of a better term, and to do just a short investigation and go from there.
Representative Gernon.
In response to your answer to Representative Malay's question, which was, what are some of your proposed solutions for the current mass school gun-related violence? How can the Youth Council and more generally the youth support these measures that you have put forward?
Best thing I can tell you is because of social media and young people like to interact with each other, if you see something that doesn't look quite right or you hear something, notify law enforcement and let them take a look at it. So I would tell you that would probably be the best thing.
Representative Weigel, I know that typically the meetings that the governing bodies at the state level hold are occurring while our students are mostly in class. But as part of their support, if there is a legislation that is occurring, would it be meaningful for these students then and for their counterparts that are interested in this, maybe to participate in testimony?
Oh, sure, yeah. There's no age limit on when you can come up to testify up there, before, for a piece of legislation to say, hey, I like this legislation because and list that out.
So-
I would be impressed by that if young people would come up there.
So understanding that we now know, and they have made it very openly public, that they are very interested in this, how do they find out about when legislation is occurring at the state levels on issues that pertain to them, such as regulation and gun sense and gun safety?
You can go to Kansas Legislature website, and it'll tell you, you can scroll down and look to, if you know the bill number, whether it's a House or a Senate bill, and you can scroll down to there, click on that bill, and it'll tell you where it's at, and not only when the next hearing will be, it'll tell you who introduced it, what committee it came out of, and how it's progressed so far. It'll give a fiscal note to how much that bill is going to cost, dollars for the state. And it'll say, referred to House Committee, Federal State Affairs, and then they'll have a next hearing date. You can also just call down there. There's a 1-800 number, and you can get all the information on that bill and track it how it's moving through the legislature. And you can figure out when they're going to have their next meeting and show up down there and put your 2 cents in.
Additional questions for Representative Weigel?
So the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Medical Association, as well as 100 other medical organizations, have stated that gun violence is a public health epidemic that needs common sense gun solutions. Would you say the Kansas state government has looked at the issue of gun violence from a public health perspective? Why or why not?
I don't know if they have looked at it in depth or not. I know I've talked to several doctors that I know about that issues and other things, and I would assume that a lot of my colleagues do that as well. Most of the people up there in the legislature, they're pretty level-headed people. And I think they think like I do. They want to get as much information as they can before they decide on how to vote for a piece of legislation. So I know that's out there. I just don't know how big of an effect it is, or how much influence. It's usually me contacting a doctor rather than doctors calling me up and say, hey, what are you going to do about this? But I do get a lot of emails on that from time to time on gun issues as well as a plethora of other issues as well. So.
Representative Hines?
Yes, so earlier you talked about how after a shooting there would be like a town meeting or something where they would discuss it a little bit. Would they have any solutions thrown out, or is it just discussed and moved on?
Well, I think the purpose of a town meeting, if it's in response to a shooting in that community, I think you would want to get as much information as you can, and then offer solutions or put ideas out there. That's how things are done. Not all ideas or solutions are going to be up there, right away, but it's always best to have more people. The more people you have involved and offering solutions, the more chance of one or two of those are going to work out and say, hey, that's a good idea. And that's a bipartisan issue. That's not just on the Democratic side or Republican side. A lot of my colleagues, a lot of friends I have over on the other side of the aisle, they're as much concerned about that as I am. They just have different perspective on how to get get to there, so. But we usually have some very good discussions on that, so.
And I will say, please understand that all of these questions were probably questions that other people were going to receive. I don't want you to feel the pressure that all the questions are coming for you to respond for the whole legislature. So we understand that this is the perspective of you as the representative that did come. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Representative Carcioni.
Considering Chief Cochran described that many of the gun problems we face arise out of people failing to practice proper gun usage, what is your stance on legislation that would require or necessitate some preliminary training for gun owners?
I'm in favor of that. When I was 18, about less than 4 weeks after I graduated from high school, I won't tell you when, I got a notice in the mail from Uncle Sam, and I was inducted in the U.S. Army. And if you're in the U.S. Army, you go through, back then, I don't know what it is now, you go through about 8 weeks of basic training. And I can remember that, and I was in a fort in Kentucky, a lot of hills in Kentucky, hot. And we would march to the firing range for about 3 weeks in a row for firearms training. And a lot of that wasn't just taking your weapon and pointing it down at a target. It was knowing how to take that weapon apart, the nomenclature, that's the parts of the weapon, and safety. And you see a lot of these movies, I don't want to talk which ones they are, I've been seeing where they have their weapon with them, or that they sleep with in their bunk when they're in basic training or somewhere training. That didn't happen. You went to the range, you learned the proper firing of the weapon, safety issues, loading, unloading, and then that weapon went back to the armorer when you were done. You didn't keep that weapon with you. Only usually when you're actually deployed to a forward area or to a combat zone, that's when you have that weapon with you, but not in a garrison.
So are there any questions for Representative Weigel before I ask Representative Weigel to come and join me and Chief Cochran to come and sit here with us? So that anybody that's out in the public that would like to make remarks, this now has become an open town hall after we have our last questions, and anybody can come and have a discussion. You have representatives directly, the chief of the city of Topeka of law enforcement, you will have a representative at the state level, and you'll have your mayor to answer any questions that you would like. Yes, Representative Millay.
So obviously considering that Democrats are generally in favor of regulatory gun legislation and Republicans are not, and that our state government has a Republican majority, is there any regulatory policy being considered right now in the legislature? And if not, what do you think is the main barrier to that?
I don't know, other than the two that I mentioned earlier, they're basically tabled, they weren't advanced. But usually when the legislative session is out, usually it goes from January to May. So between June till January of the next year, which is coming up in a few months when the next session will start, you will find that lobbyists, people that on both sides of the issue are formulating legislation, putting it into paper, and then they're talking to their legislators in their districts about new policies and new legislation that they want to have presented to whatever body it is, whichever committee they're in at the next session. So that's an ongoing process. I will tell you this, that there's probably, probably well over 1,000 bills And not all, a lot of those just don't see the light of day, so.
So Representative, if, let's say that in a crazy world, there is a resolution that is agreed upon in this nonpartisan body of students, and they were to address, let's say, maybe the young Democrats and the young Republicans and work on some sort of thing that they would like to put together to present to the state body as alternatives and as a bipartisan measure, how would they go about presenting a bill at the state?
Contact your legislator, your state representative, find out who your state representative or your state senator, and say, you know, send them an email or call them up and say, hey, I've been thinking about a piece of legislation. And sometimes they'll even help you craft it if you don't know exactly what you want to have in the bill. They'll actually help you. And once they get it, they can take it to our legislative research, a very good nonpartisan, bipartisan part of the legislature, and they do all of our research work for us. A very, very efficient, very good group of people. And they can find out all the ins and outs of whatever you're looking at. So I would say contact your legislators.
Thank you very much. So at this point in time, I would like to invite Chief and Representative Weigel to join me up here. And you did not have to sign up for public comment. I will say that if you do want to step up and ask any questions or make any remarks for us to consider tonight, the microphone is open not only to the representatives here, but if you are one of the adults that are here supporting the youth or have questions for the youth that are here this evening, you're welcome to do so. What I will ask as a favor is we will put a 4-minute limit to your remarks. You will have the opportunity to ask any of us questions. You may have heard things that you agree with or that you do not agree with. I will ask that we have a conversation with decorum, with respect for each other and understanding that we all have different ways of seeing things and different ways of working through things because we all have legislative bodies and policies that we have to find. But this conversation is open for all of you to come forth and just have a town hall and ask anything that you want of us. So we will leave this open for any of you to please come up and speak up, because this is going to be the rest of the meeting. This is your meeting. Tamika, I see you. You're running.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mayor, Youth Council, TopCity in the house, Chief, Legislature. I just want to say thank you, young people. I think it's amazing for us to have you involved in the crime, in the violence that's going on, because you guys are our leaders for tomorrow. I kind of was wondering to know how the selection was so that we can fill the 2 vacant seats, District 2, District 3. I feel those are 2 of our blighted communities. I feel there's a lot of crime. When I go to those NIA meetings, there's a lot of crime in those areas. How can we fix that to where we can get maybe some of the non-interested children in to represent at functions like this?
So there is a selection process. They will go to the, Jacob, if you would like to give them the site that they could go and sign in and.
Yeah. So, well, the application process, well, basically, the way it works is in order to increase people applying from all walks of life, when the application process, the window is open, we've sent it out to all the schools in the county, and then so the principals there will push it out to their counselors, and then the counselors will push it out to the teachers and individual students. So that way, let's say a teacher hears about this opportunity and they have a particular student in mind that would bring a unique voice to the table, or something like that, and then they can ask them, and then they fill out the application. Yeah.
So if you have any individuals that you think would be a good fit, make sure that you let us know so that we could get them the application.
Certainly,
Oh, the ages?
The age is 14 to 21, and you have to be a high school freshman.
Oh, okay, so it's high school on that, which is good. I just was curious, there was an incident at my daughter's middle school a couple weeks ago involving a gun. Unfortunately, I was not notified until the next day. Thanks to the Topeka Police Department and, Detective Roth, he immediately emailed me and got right on it because he didn't hear about it. So my question for the chief would be, how fast do you get notified of any threats or of any gun violence? Because it was terrifying, and actually there was a large number of students that were excused because they did not attend school that next day until they got clear answers and it was transparent why, what, who, when, and where. So how soon do you get notified?
It is, if the light is green, it's on.
501 has their own police department. And so initially, they respond to a lot of those things. And then what they do, they make a threat assessment as to what took place or what happened. And then it's determined whether we get contacted or not. They have the ability to file charges and all that other stuff. They're a full-fledged police department. And so there are things that happen within the school that the city police department may not be aware of at the front end, and it may be a day or two. We do work very, very closely with USD 501 Police Department. We have a great relationship. But with that being said, they are their own law enforcement agency, and so they do handle some things based upon their threat assessment and what the school feels.
Okay. Yeah, because they had the situation. It was handled, I think, with more of the concerns of the parents. The KPI and all that got involved, but it was an assessment type, and the student body was addressed, and the concern that the 501 district as well as the law enforcement have for each and every student as well as the staff was addressed. So thank you guys for that. I'm just excited to see the young people here just handling big things. I want to be like y'all up there one day. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Trammell.
Good evening. Appreciate the forum. I will like to reiterate what the mayor said. You all are relevant, and you need to know you are. I have 3 questions, and then I'll just leave it out there. And Mayor, if you take those forward, I'd appreciate it. One is, I'm asking the Youth Council, do you all feel safe in Topeka, and why or why not? 2, I would like to address to these 2 gentlemen, assault weapons. I didn't hear any conversation about should we, shouldn't we, what do we do to protect or slow it down or stop it. And 3, I would ask the youth, at what age do you think the youngest age should be to carry a gun or to have the right to have a permit for a weapon? I'd like to know what the youth thinks about this and where those fit. So thank you.
Would any of the young leaders like to answer the questions of Mr. Trammell?
Yeah, I can answer. Personally, when I'm walking in downtown Topeka or even in my neighborhood, I am constantly thinking of a backup plan in case something were to pop out or if I were to be caught off guard. I'm constantly feeling just slightly unsafe, but hopeful, I guess. I don't know what goes through my head, but that's why I thought it was so important to have this discussion, just so that I knew that there was some sort of progress or some sort of discussion about it, and I could kind of just have more hope for my future and for my kids and the future of Topeka and stuff. So
Would somebody like to answer to Mr. Trammell from the Youth Commission, the Youth Council, with regards to what age you guys consider would be the right age? Mr. Gernon, to be followed by Representative Malay.
For me, I personally think 21 or older. I don't see much logic in the fact that, in some areas where the age is 18, you can purchase a firearm, but you can't purchase alcohol. I feel like that's a slight disconnect.
Representative Malay.
That was actually exactly what I was going to say as well. If we can't be trusted to take care of ourselves, in terms of alcohol consumption, how can we be trusted to make sure our environment is safe with owning a firearm? So I agree that it should be at least 21 years of age.
And then for the representatives and the chief, there was no mention of semi-automatic weapons. Would anybody like to take that question from Mr. Trammell?
When you get into assault rifles, and I think you'll have something to say too, but when you get into assault rifles, you do get into a different conversation. And again, I can just speak, I do go against the mainstream on a lot of people in this. My personal opinion is, I personally see no reason why somebody needs an assault rifle. I'm a retired Army, and I've seen what those weapons can do. And me personally, I don't see what purpose they serve in our community in the hands of anybody. You can't make the argument to me that you use it to go deer hunting, because you go deer hunting, you get one shot. If you miss it, they're gone. But that's just me. I was raised where I hunted, and we used shotguns, and that's what we used. But when you get into the realm of assault rifles, my personal opinion is, I have no idea why you need it.
Representative Weigel?
A little bit of background, and then I'll tell you what my position is. I'm not originally from Topeka. I was born and went to high school out in Hayes, about 200 miles west of here. And I can remember, here I'm going to date myself again, back in the 60s, high school. And I didn't live on a farm, from western Kansas, and I would see the guys, the people that were about my age, I'm talking about junior, seniors in high school, drive in from where they lived out on a farm in their old beat-up pickup trucks, and in the back window, they would have usually a shotgun or a 22 or maybe a 30-06 hanging in there. They would drive up to this, and this is unheard of today, but they would drive into the school parking lot, park their truck, and it would sit there all day till they went home. You can't do that nowadays. I'm talking that was probably in the 60s. So there's a disconnect for me. I think, and it drives me crazy, because I'm trying to understand what happened from 1966 or 67 till 1999, when all of this kind of exploded on the scene. I wish I could have had an answer for that, but I don't. Second part of the answer is I'm not a big fan of assault weapons, what they call AR weapons, especially with large capacity magazines. If they say they need it to go hunting, I'm like with the chief. You know, if you're out hunting a deer, you usually take one round, and if you miss, then that deer's gone, and then it takes another 3 hours to find another deer. So that's my opinion on assault weapons, and especially large or high capacity magazines. I just don't see the need for those at all.
Appreciate that.
Of course. Anybody else would like to come forward, make some remarks? Yes, absolutely. I know who you are, but could you identify yourself for our viewers?
Hello, my name is Lillian Holmberg. I am a freshman at Washburn University, but I've lived in Topeka my whole entire life. Something that I hear a lot on Washburn's campus is how students don't feel safe in Topeka, especially the idea that these students come from other towns, other cities, in Kansas especially, but even from other states. And they are concerned about the increase in violence in Topeka. They don't feel safe leaving campus, so they tend to stay on campus in the dorms. And when they do leave, it's not more than a block away or so. But recently, I have seen videos of students saying that with the increase in gun violence and the incident occurring over the summer with the Washburn student, that they just do not feel safe in Topeka, which violence in Topeka impacts all different areas. It stems into other things, such as economic growth. So if you see students from Washburn who are studying in Topeka, not feeling safe in Topeka, then they're not going to want to stay in Topeka. You're not going to be able to retain that young talent. So even with the amount of security we have on campus, the amount of officers who patrol the area, there are students still feeling kind of intimidated by the area in which they live. And there's no real question here, because I can't really ask what can we do to solve this, because this is a lot of times youth on youth violence, which has to be answered by the youth. So I can't ask the police department how, we should stop this other than reporting suspicious activity, because, there's no real way to see that. Because we see that statistically students who are in college or are, focused on their studies are not going to be the ones involved in these shootings. Unfortunately, over the summer, someone who was involved in the football athletic department did get involved in one of these incidents, but statistically, these aren't my peers are not the ones causing the violence or participating in it. But I just need the city to know that students at Washburn who aren't from Topeka feel unsafe in Topeka, and I just needed to to bring that message, let you all know that. Thank you.
Lillian, thank you for your comments. Anybody else would like to come forward?
Hello, I'm Teresa Taylor. I'm a lifelong Topekan as well. I work at Stormont Vale. I'm a nurse with a background in emergency and trauma. One of the parts of my position at Stormont Vale now is injury prevention in the community. So I get to work with Chief Cochran on the group violence project. And thank you so much for your leadership with that. I appreciate your comment earlier about the public health perspective. And so I think we've touched on that a little bit, but it's so much more than guns. And Representative, you touched on, we don't know what happened from 1960 whatever to 1999. We need to take a deeper dive. We need to look more closely at violence in general, not just gun violence, what's happening in our minds and in our society that is making things so much different. But you guys are doing that. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for asking these questions. I would encourage you to get a hold of your representative and your senators here in the state and nationally, to let them know that you're here, you want to talk about these issues, you're holding them accountable, they represent you. Tell them you want things done, you want things changed. We need to look at this more holistically than we have, and we need to try new things. Your city and your county, absolutely, all levels, we need to have young people engaged. So watch that legislation as it comes up, but keep your representatives and senators under fire. Let them know, probably not the best term there, sorry about that, but let them know that you want them to be the one to introduce. And when those things come up, if you ask them to let you know when they see bills come by. Ask them to email you and let you know when there's something, so that you can tell them where you stand on it and where you want them to stand on it, because they work for you. So thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing this issue. Thank you for being engaged. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, some youth. More youth. Could you please state your name?
Hello, my name is Daniel Franklin. I go to Highland Park. And basically my question is for the people that work in the police department. It's more than just guns being bought from other people. Guns are everywhere now. And basically when I say that, I mean it's more easier to get guns from a you know, an unlegal source or illegal source than a legal source. So like basically they can be shared on and transformed from one person to another person real easily. And so I just have a question, like how, if you really want to present gun violence, how can you like prevent gun violence by like making sure it's not into the wrong hands, but for it not to be in the wrong hands, it's all about the person that gets it first. Because dads can give their sons guns, big brothers, sisters, cousins, anything like that. They can easily get a gun. So I just have a question, like, you know, and they basically might be old enough or older. So I just like, how can that be prevented? Like, how can that stop, you know?
That's a very good question, and that's one of the things that we deal with on a routine basis. Like you said, unfortunately, it's probably easier to obtain a firearm now than it is to obtain illegal narcotics because of the prevalence of firearms. And you're exactly right. Fathers and big brothers have weapons, and young people can get access to those, and that's one of the things when I talked about responsible ownership. You know, if you own a firearm, take precautions. The other thing is, your representative said, Representative. Like the representative said, education on firearms is extremely important. Knowing how to handle them, knowing how they work, and really knowing what they can do. I think a lot of when we talk about gun violence, and it is more just than gun violence. It's violence across the board, but gun violence is one that seems to be getting a lot of attention right now. Yeah, I think a lot of it is, you know, educating young people, educating adults who have firearms in the aspect of how you secure them properly. And then again, I think, I will stand by, I think de-escalation training for young people is extremely important. Nowadays, it seems like when something happens, there's a conflict, people turn to firearms, and it's not just young people, it's across the board. But I think if we start with young people, giving them some of them life skills, how to de-escalate, how to properly handle a firearm, that we hope that the future becomes safe.
And if I could address that question for you, first of all, I would like to say thank you for being so bold and standing up here and talking to us. I know that us sitting in a podium could be kind of intimidating, right?
Yeah.
We're just people just like you. And we have the same concerns that you have. You know what? The moment that somebody at your age feels like they need a gun is a clear demonstration on how we failed our youth. Because it means that at any point in time that you feel like you need to grab a weapon to keep yourself safe, it means that your community was not there for you. And I know that we have complicated lives. I'm a single mom, right? I can't be there 24/7. My kids don't have two people in the house. They end up having like a whole city now that's watching over them. But in reality, you have a lot of single parent homes. You have two parent homes of people that are constantly working. And a lot of our young people are growing up without the support networks that they need in order for them to have the conversations that we need to have. In addition to that, we live in a world right now in which everything is duped out just because of something that we disagree upon on social media without care and concern for human beings. Kids like you and much younger than you are having Facebook accounts in which they're being bullied, not only when they're in school, but also when they go home. And we have a scarcity of adults that give a damn. So my call is to everybody that's watching this town hall right now, listen to the question that this young man just posed to you. Because this was not a question for the police chief. This was a question for our community. And how are we going to wrap our arms around our youth and around our families so that there is not one child that feels compelled to take the weapon that their brother or their father or their mother or whoever is giving to them, because that's not the way that they feel that they have to solve an issue. Thank you for speaking up.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions for the team? I saw Mary getting up. Mary, just get up and just stand there so that you could wait after. No, please, come forward. Go ahead. Come on. It's an open forum.
Yes. Okay. My name is McKenna Orton, and so one aspect that I'm a little interested in is the gang violence side of this. So I'm wondering, was there a police task force for gang violence at one point?
We've had units come and go.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, one of the main units that focuses on gun violence is our narcotics unit as well as our community police unit, and then that's augmented by the field operations.
Cool. Okay. And then I was just wondering if you feel that that's an effective way to combat that, and then that kind of bleeds into gun violence just a little bit. But
Well, I would say I'm really excited where we're headed, and I say that in the aspect that by the end of the year, we're going to enhance our narcotics unit. We're adding to that because one of the things that drives a lot of our violence across the board, not just gun violence, but violence across the board, is narcotics issues. And so when I say that, I've been asked, well, what are you doing about it? Well, we joined a drug task force with the Shawnee County Sheriff's Office, and that was also facilitated with other municipalities within Shawnee County. And the focus is going to be after the first year that we really are able to combat violent crimes in the aspect when it's arranged with narcotics, and then that also ties into human trafficking.
thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Mary, come on down. Could you please introduce yourself for the crowd?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Mary Akerstrom. I work with the Poor People's Campaign. I'm a citizen activist here in Topeka, lifelong Topekan. My comments, what we do in the Poor People's Campaign is we look at how our issues intersect. And there is a correlation between high poverty and high crime. Whole communities that are struck by poverty are left with no resources, and so many feel they may have no choice but to resort to criminal activity just for survival. In Topeka, the majority of our public school families are struggling with poverty. I want to say it's in the 70% of our public school families and children qualify for free and reduced lunches. It's a lot of people for not a large city. We have in this country a very strong war economy, but a very weak educational budget. And I think that might also be a place where the youth can focus, is taking a look at the federal level and how, as a nation, we pump a lot of money into war, but we don't pump a lot of money into education. If we can maybe figure out a way to flip those numbers and give students the security that education provides, maybe we'll see less violence. Another cultural issue is that it's not only the responsibility of gun owners to lock up their guns or to keep the ammo put away separately, because kids are smart, right? They're gonna figure out where the key to that lock is. They're gonna figure out how to get to the ammunition that they need. They're gonna figure it out. It's the responsibility of gun owners and of our federal and state governments to face the truth and to change the laws and to basically tell the NRA to sit down and shut up. The NRA has used cash to corrupt several federal legislators, and that's truth. The thing that's changed since the 60s is that the average family does not have the same level of disposable income and prosperity that families had 40, 50 years ago, because our wealth distribution in this country has become extremely unequal. So across the country, we see 140 million people dealing with poverty. And I don't have the Kansas numbers right in front of me, but it's a lot of people in rural areas are poor. A lot of farmers are committing suicide because they just can't make it. As a farmer, it costs on average $7 million just to start a farm. Wealth inequality, lack of funding for education, for public education, along with just the trauma of living in poverty is what contributes to gun violence. And those are some of the other issues that we need to address, not just who owns the weapons and who has access to them. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I will make a remark. I am a huge believer that poverty does not equate crime. I think that I do understand that there is information that when you look at the level of crime, some of the crime can be pinpointed, yes, to low-income neighborhoods, but what I don't want our public to hear is that individuals who are in poverty are criminals. I remember being homeless, and there was not a time in my life in which I thought of taking something from somebody or harming somebody's life. And most importantly, when we take a look at the individuals that are causing the mass murders that we're having in our country, they're not individuals that lack resources. They happen to be, in vast majority, Caucasian males who have taken upon themselves, having access to these weapons and doing things. So although I do support the fact that we do have to address the inequality issue, and as you know, I'm very open about that, I do also want to make sure that our families that are listening, that are struggling financially, understand that your comments were not geared to making them feel like criminals, because poverty and crime are not the same thing.
And I do not mean to make a blanket statement like that, because I also experience poverty and I don't own a weapon and I do everything I can. But for some individuals, they feel like they have no other choice. So,
thank you.
Thanks.
Additional comments or questions? Mr. Graves, could you please approach the podium and introduce yourself?
Good evening, Youth Commission, adults. My name is Lazone Graves, a citizen of Topeka. I've also been a governor's appointee for the Kansas Advisory Group on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention for probably about 8 years. And I guess my question is for the adults and maybe some input from the young people on the perspective of delinquency prevention. One, do you think that delinquency prevention is needed? Two, is the level that we are doing things today, is it adequate? And if not, maybe from the young people's perspective, what needs to change? The delinquency prevention type of programs of the 70s or 80s or even 90s may no longer suffice as we move forward. That, from my understanding, that there's plenty of policy and things that are going for the juvenile justice side and the cognitive behavioral, portion. But if we have the type of programming where young people either don't want to get in trouble, or the first time that they get in trouble, and we have worked for many years with first-time juvenile offenders doing community service, and I've tried to take it on of, once we have them in our environment, to change their mindset and their outlook. But we started that like in 94, 95, where technology wasn't where it is today. Whereas I'm not going to say that videos or games or anything are violent in causing things, but we do have to understand that young people are not getting out and just floating around and doing things in the community like it was when we were younger. So I guess there has not been a lot of, and this is coming up because there's funding from the federal level that is coming towards the states. And how is that going to be allocated? If a city believes that delinquency prevention is important and is not maybe being really looked at, then maybe we can prepare in advance. But if young people and adults believe that we have enough programs, and I'm not just talking about basket weaving, and those easy programs, maybe we need to start looking at, as you had said, putting something together to where it can be a model, not just looking for a model, but I think that capital city should lead, and that we have some great brains here that we can put together a model, that other cities can look at. So I'd really just like to understand the importance that people may see on delinquency prevention, because as someone who votes for which programs get funded across the state, I want to be able to lend my voice and vote, to try to help out this community right here and have the young people involved, help lead that.
So, Chief, would you, because I think that, could you elaborate on some of the delinquency prevention programs that we have in Topeka? And then address the question of whether you feel it's sufficient or not?
Well, a lot of the delinquency programs are built within the school system itself. And so one of the things that we have really tried to do, expand our role within USD 501 and with Washburn University as well. We're involved now in the TCAP program, and that's, the professional track. We also now teach law enforcement in all 4 of the high schools in Topeka, and we're involved in the middle schools. And so what our focus is now more on mentorship with our school resource officers and our programs. And then, as you know, restorative justice, I think, is extremely important for youth especially. Just because they've done something doesn't mean their life should be over. And so if we can turn that around and make them productive and want them to be in school so they can finish it, because we all know that education is extremely important. Education is the future. And so keeping those young people engaged in school, wanting to be involved in school, I think is more than just the school system's responsibility. I think it is part of the community's responsibility. And how do we wrap around those services when they get out of school? What are we doing for them when they get out of school? They go to the Boys and Girls Club. We got a great program there. But I think we need to look at things like that. And I don't know who runs some of those programs or should run some of those programs. We, at the police department, we work very closely with the Boys and Girls Club. We're very involved there. And so we do a lot of those things. And then at the university level, we're working there. We've established liaison officers with the athletic programs and for students to have that resource available to them. So those are some of the things that we're doing. And but I don't know, for us, we don't need dollars to make those things happen. Those are things we're doing because it's the right thing to do, if that makes sense. But I do think we need to look at what alternatives are there for the young people when they get out of school, and maybe get an idea, and maybe that's where the young people here can say, hey, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is what we need help with.
So I do have to say, by our bylaws, the meeting is supposed to end at 7:30. I do want to make sure that I ask what the pleasure of the body is, if you would like to give it a 15-minute extension, because we're like at 7:28. Just to allow for some other individuals to speak, and if there's nobody else signed up to speak that wants to step up, I want to make sure that we still have that ability without feeling like we're rushing anybody with the conversation. So is there a motion for a 15-minute extension to 7:45? And we could extend again if we feel like there's a lot of conversation.
I motion to extend the meeting.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Hines.
I second.
We have a second by Councilwoman Carnacioni. Is there any questions, discussions? We have a motion and a second. All of those in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. So do you feel like your question was answered, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to add, I do sit on one of the committees I sit on is Corrections and Juvenile Justice. And I've sat on that committee for 3 years now. This will be my 4th year when we go back in session. And we talk a lot about juvenile issues.
Senate Bill 367.
Yeah. And I think it has to be a community effort. And it has to start with peers in the schools. I think the administrators or teachers should recognize who the leaders are in the various classes and approach them and say, this person over here might need a little extra help. That, if they recognize that. And I think the peers, starting with the peers, would go quite a ways to help that situation. That's just one thing. I think that, like Police Athletic League and Boys and Girls Clubs, those are great. The schools have a lot of programs after school, and churches, the local, your local church have those as well. I know mine does. So I think maybe you need to put some kind of laundry list together of all of the different entities that could help in that regard, and make that available to people that recognize the fact that there's people out there that may need a little extra help. And I think that's one way to get started on that.
And maybe the young people can do that because they're.
And that's what I was gonna say. I think that as the youth council is looking at things to maybe put together to present back to the governing bodies, this would be a great area for you to say what you need in your community, so that you could, what are the types of initiatives that you guys would like to see in our community? What would you like to do after school that you don't see in Topeka, Shawnee County, so that as you're discussing what suggestions you're gonna make to the bodies of regulations that you would like to see policy-wise, you're also addressing what are the things that you would like to see in your community that would also be supportive. So that was a great question. Thank you so much, Mr. Grace.
Thank you for your time.
Any other questions or comments from the public? We extended because we wanted to hear your voice if you had anything to say, so. Yes. Yes, you can come back up.
I'm McKenna Orton again, and just tagging on to the last part of that comment, I think a need that we definitely have is safe youth spaces in our area. For example, after school, where do you hang out? Sonic. But also, where have I heard that people take guns and drugs? Sonic. So just having those safe spaces for youth. Thank you.
Thank you. Suggestions, that's wonderful. Anybody else would like to stand up and speak and say something? I'm surprised that our illustrious Melissa Masoner is not chomping at the bit. Going once? Going twice? Okay, at this point in time, the town hall has been closed. I want to thank everybody that came. And to those of you who are going to have the opportunity to watch this at home, this is what bipartisan, nonpartisan discussion looks like about an issue that is important and sensitive to our youth and to the people in our community. To those of you who are watching, I want to tell you, this was amazing. We have a group of young individuals that decided to talk about a subject. We had a lot of people stand up and make their remarks, and not once did I feel that the comments were loaded, disrespectful. They were all thoughtful. The feedback that the youth provided had me in awe several times. So I hope that as people are looking at this, and I can tell you that I know that there's nationally right now people looking at this, there is a sense of how discourse could occur on things that are challenging. It doesn't have to be rough. It doesn't have to be negative. It just has to be open. And yet again, as history has demonstrated, the young people are leading it. So I want to say thank you to all of you for being here. I want to thank all of you. I think that one of the things that the youth is going to do is for the individuals that were not able to participate today, I think that they are going to send a letter with these questions to them, to every level. They're going to send a letter with the questions to the federal level, they're going to send it to the state level, and they're going to send it to the county and the council for the individuals that were not able to participate here today. And I would invite all of you, as you see, to just send your responses. Some of the responses may be popular, some of them may not, but it's okay. The youth wants to hear about your suggestions because they want to hear all sides to then come back to this body and come back to all of you with their recommendations on things that they learned from all of you on how to help have a conversation about gun violence and what they are concerned about and how they can participate in the solutions. So at this point in time, I'm going to open it up for final comments from the youth, if there's anything that they would like to say before we adjourn. Representative Gernon.
So there was some mention about community involvement and how coming together is one way to reduce the need, someone's need to, or someone who feels the need to obtain a firearm. And so the Youth Council and then larger, the Topeka Youth Commission is actively trying to increase community involvement. And one of those ways is to increase the knowledge of what there is in Topeka and youth safe spaces like McKenna Orton mentioned. And so on October 26th, the Topeka Youth Commission is holding a grub crawl, a tour of downtown restaurants, and you get to taste the food. And it's only, you can learn more at the website, topekayc.org, but it's one way that we're trying to increase community involvement in the community. Thank you.
Additional comments? City manager, any thoughts or comments? Very interesting indeed. Closing comments? Seeing none, thank you all. This meeting is adjourned.